Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Well, hello there, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Brad Wilson, and today's guest on this show is author of the Total Poker Manual, Sasha Sutton. Sasha's path, which you're about to learn all about, to the world of poker is unlike pretty much anyone I've met in the poker world. After spending 3+ decades as an extremely successful creative and financial writer, she made the fated decision to attend a workshop at the age of 55 where she was introduced to the world of poker. After getting bitten by the wily poker bug initially, a few weeks later she received a cosmic sign from the universe that poker was meant to be a major part of her life when none other than past Chasing Poker Greatness guest, 3-time WSOP bracelet winner Matt Matros attended one of her writing workshops. When she found out who he was, she asked him for private coaching. He accepted, and poker has been a major part of Sasha's life ever since. In today's conversation with Sasha Sutton, you're going to learn how amazing of a human being Sasha is. Seriously, she's led a life so full of excitement and adventure that you won't be able to help but leave this conversation inspired. How ignorance is not only just bliss, it can lead you to accomplishing amazing things you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. More great stories about the New York underground poker scene, and much, much more. And before you dive into my conversation with Sasha, I just wanted to take a moment to let you know I've recently completed my 3rd cash game course, and it's called Neutralize Flop Leads. With one PDF and a couple of hours of study, you'll never again feel confused when facing a donk bet in a single raised pot. You can check it out at ChasingPokerGreatness.com/Nuffle. That's ChasingPokerGreatness.com/NUFFLE. Now, without any further ado, I bring to you author, business builder, and poker player, the brilliant and insightful Sasha Sutton. Sasha, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited to get this done. We had to push it back. All my fault. I take full responsibility. I hate when I have to tell somebody something and then reschedule it. I feel bad. So having this conversation means a lot to me. And I apologize that you had to wait a couple of extra weeks, and just super pumped to have you on now.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor. And I'm really, I'm so impressed with what you've done with the podcast. And you've had so many wonderful voices and many of my heroes. So it's congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a little crazy how it's all happened. You know, it just kind of started out and just kept plugging along, and all of a sudden it became like a thing, which, yeah, I think that it's very unexpected, I guess, how much the brand and how much the podcast resonates with people.
Yeah, there's that old formula, which I had in some marketing collateral a long time ago, like our best efforts are 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. So, and I love what you just said, that you kind of keep your head down and you just sort of look at whatever the effort, the tiny piece of the effort that's right in front of you. And it just grows organically, and it takes on a life of its own, which I think is a great metaphor, and some lessons in there for how we learn and engage the game. But it's lovely when it happens that way and you don't have expectation. I think the technology now kind of imposes a set of I think it has changed consciousness in so many dramatic ways, but that big and many and all of that is more important than kind of just a little few inches right in front of you in your own.
Taking off the next box, and just take off the next box, do the next thing that needs to be done. Yeah. I think that I attribute the success of Chasing Poker Greatness and my own poker career to mostly ignorance as it related to how hard it would be. If I knew how hard everything was before I started, I probably never would have tried to do it. You're like, oh yeah, this is a fun thing. And you're just purely ignorant about how to make it work. And eventually you just keep solving problems. And then one day you kind of like look behind and you're like, oh my gosh, like I could never have imagined that I would invest this many hours into such an endeavor.
Somebody once said you have to have an obsessive gambly demon. You have to have an obsessive gamble demon period early in your poker life to kind of attach you to the process, which I certainly had. And I've talked to other players who've had that too. I've grown past that. But I think what you're describing, I love what you're saying. I haven't quite heard it expressed that way. But yeah, I think you don't really know what. It's almost like the Alien movie sort of metaphor around, like, you have this creature growing inside you and it takes over your being. But in poker, it's a pleasant overtaking over time. Hopefully.
I feel like any success that I've had in my life is just me magooing it around and like just bumbling into some random success just through pure immersion. And really, I guess for the listener, loving what you do is the number one component of the recipe. These conversations fire me up. I love doing them. And if I didn't love doing them, I wouldn't have stuck with it. And the same is with poker. I loved playing. I was immersed. It was exciting. And because I loved it, it didn't matter the next thing I had to tick off. I was going to tick it off. Like, I was just going to keep progressing every single day. And, you get pushed down, you get back up. Like, you're measured in how many times you get back up, not how many times you fall. So I think that loving something is really the first component. If anybody out there is listening that like wants to play poker, they're halfway interested because they think they can make a lot of money doing it. That's not a recipe for poker success. That's not enough to be resilient, to get through the bad days, because it's tough and there are lots of bad days.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And
that's very true.
Sasha, typically I start out this show by asking my guests their story, how they found poker. If you don't mind, I'll ask you how old you are so we can get a timeline of like when all this goes down through the years.
Sure. I'm 65, actually 64. I'll be 65 next month. So I have a pretty weird story in terms of poker origin. I collect everybody's poker origin stories. I collect them. I've just like have tens and tens of them in my brain because I'm extremely competitive, because everybody else got to start playing chess when they were 7 and poker when they were 12 and this and that and the other. But when I was 55, I was living in New York City, and this part of my story, I've actually told it a number of times, and it always I try to tell it in a way that's not goofy, but it definitely has some fairy dust sprinkled on it. And poker was all over my family as a child. I grew up in LA. I had a sprawling family and everybody played cards and all those beautiful family narratives like many of us have. It was never my life. In my 20s.
Did you love playing the games? Did you love cards? Did it resonate with you as a kid?
No, I remember like I had a Crazy Eights and a gin rummy life with my father, right? Like, but it wasn't, although when I was 20, I was still living in LA and I was going to Vegas a lot and playing a lot of 21. And I could sit at a 21 table for like 14 hours in that period. Again, it wasn't like I was connecting those dots at all. And then 55 minus 20, whatever that is, 35 years went by. And I went to a corporate event in New York City. There was a woman who had a business model. I actually recently connected with another brand that is a beautiful.
Can we go back a little bit? What were you doing? What were you doing in life? What was your profession? What were you consumed with leading up to that?
I've been a writer for almost 30 years. So, I was in, Los Angeles, working as a literary agent in my 20s. I got married when I was 25. And then, I was divorced when I was around 30 and, not happy with my LA life for a number of reasons. And I had a friend in New York City and I was flying back and forth and I kind of loved the vibe in New York and I was pretty unhappy in LA. And, I didn't even know that my grandmother was born on the Lower East Side in 1903. I had origin in New York. No one ever told me this. So I've had a really high variance life. for 30, 40 years. I really have. And I just like left LA and moved to New York City.
What were you doing in New York?
Well, I didn't have much of a plan. I loved the city and I felt like it was where I needed to be. And I started slow and I had odd jobs, and I ended up working for a publishing company and doing sort of writerly connected things. And I was a freelance journalist and just surviving, kind of, it's New York. So you kind of have a lot of those balls in the air. And then let's see, that was, yeah. And then,
well, you're starting to build your life, right? You're building your life in New York away from LA.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, it's like, oh, right. Yeah, and it was definitely, I was sort of kind of organizing my energy around my writing career, my creative energy. And, I then took a job, at a big company. I got a very plum writing job at a big company in New York City. And then I was there, and then about somehow 12 or 13 years went by. And, I was working, I was in my early 40s and I was unhappy. I'm just very entrepreneurial and I'm very like rebellious and I don't like working for other people. So I left that job and I wanted to go out on my own. And I started a practice as a writer, which became a marketing practice and a writing practice in financial services, which I then honed over many years. And that was really interesting and fascinating. And that financial link, in which I think I ended up with my poker life later on, I never had any formal training in the market. But the minute I kind of found financial services in a marketing and a writing context like that, that was a huge click for me. It literally just like a tile that fell into place. And then I had a thriving practice, and that supported me through it's still a piece of my life. And I've led this enterprise for 22 years. It allowed me to go to graduate school. I got my master's in creative writing from New York University when I was 50. So my life just like whatever you do at 25, I'm going to do like 25 years later or whatever. You know what I mean? And that's just been my whole life. And I'm kind of used to that now. So God willing, I'm like, please let me live to 93 because I need like more time. Everything just pushed back.
I think that's representative of a life well lived when you need more time to pursue the things that you're passionate about and you're constantly pursuing your passions. And I can kind of see the pieces of poker. They're kind of coming into place where it's like you want this autonomy in your career. You want to do your own thing. You want to be your own person. You find financial services. Obviously, like this ties directly into poker and pursuing poker, or even looking at it and it being a fascinating thing filled with people who are your people, right? Like these are effectively people who are your mirrors.
These are risk takers and risk ratio people. And one of my partners is also, he has a very successful content marketing agency. And then he's a very successful trader. And then I've also, as part of my corporate, I call it my corporate life. So I have a poker life, and I have a writing life, and I have a corporate life. So those are the three balls I've had in the air for the last 20 years. My partner is a very successful options trader, and I've edited one of the most successful options magazines in the country for the last 9 years. So, poker and the stock market are not, they're just like Siamese twins, right? I actually read trading books to get better at the game. That's really what I love to read, in addition to the poker books I read. But
let's segue to the poker. Now that we're seeing these pieces fall into place, you're 55 years old, and then something happens. Something happens. What happened?
Yeah. A narrative inflection point, as we say in novel writing, rising action. Yeah, in my corporate life, there was a woman in New York who had a brand where she was teaching women the principles of poker in order to be more successful in their corporate lives. This is a business model now that's been replicated, and I just found another brand that's doing that as well at a really high level. And their goal is to train 1 million women, literally 1 million women, how to play the game. So
is that Poker Power?
It is Poker Power, yeah. So I went to this corporate event innocently, and I almost didn't go. Like, I was on the train, it was cold. I was like, F this. Like, what the hell is? I don't
You can
wanna
say
be
the F word. If
Oh,
you
I can.
want.
Okay, I'm like I can average. I swear, like a sailor. So, yeah, I'm like, fuck this. Like, I don't fucking want to go to this thing. Like, what am I doing? I just want to go home. And so I went. It's this beautiful midtown, lavish place for a corporate luncheon. This woman taught like 80 women how to play poker in 2 hours. And she had these huge cards. She's holding them up, in front of the room. And then we played. She taught us for like an hour. And then we like played a little tournament or whatever for like an hour. And something just unleashed in me. Like, I had been playing poker. Well, I think, I think what's also important to sort of sprinkle onto this narrative is how women are socialized into competition and aggression and achievement and all of that stuff. And even though I'm not, like, I didn't come of age in the 40s or 50s, I came of age in the 60s and the 70s, and women are still finding their place. Vanessa Selbst, whom I know, and I played at some charity things within New York City, like she's written about these ideas of how women are socialized into these things that make you successful in poker. So when I played when I played poker that day, what unleashed in me what I felt like a kind of competitive monster in the best sense, capital C, capital M. And I remember feeling like so mad that this stupid woman, she won the little stupid trophy, and like, I hated her shoes, and, I was just like so agitated, and I was like, what the hell is this? Like, what are these feelings, right? And then a few months goes by, and this is where the fairy dust stuff gets weirder. And I was literally sitting at my desk, and it was snowing, and it was February, and I was working late at night. And then I just said to myself, like, I heard a voice, and it was like, you were really happy playing poker. Why don't you do some more of that? I'm like, okay. So I found the woman who taught me. She was teaching classes in New York. Like, nobody learns poker this way. Nobody goes to a class to learn. It's so bizarre. So I went and took 3 weeks of classes from her. And then a bunch of us broke off from that. It was all women, mostly women. It's like 98% women. And a bunch of us broke off. And then I had a community of gals in New York in the Upper East Side. And we were playing like low stakes home game buying, $20 buying tourneys or whatever. That was the beginning. And it was just, and then, but Brad, what was like very significant for me was like, I do feel like, I don't know, this just sounds really goofy too, that we just kind of know so much about our lives and on a more intuitive level and a less than conscious level. And I just kind of felt from the very, very beginning that this was something that was going to be forever for me. Like, it's going to be the rest of my life. And I was very like cocky, and I was very arrogant. I was a fetus. I was a poker fetus. And I felt like, yeah, I know everything, I'd be like, oh no, you should be playing.
Have you felt that way about other things in your life, that you encounter something and you're like, this is a thing I'm going to just do forever?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Not even writing?
Writing is just oxygen for me. It's just, I found my writing life late. Like, I went to college late. Of course I did. I graduated college at 28 and found my writing life there. And then so writing for me was, yeah, it's funny. I feel I'd have to think about that. It's a good question, but it did feel like.
What is that feel? Can you describe that feeling of like just encountering something in the world that grabs you in such a way that you want to do it forever, and there's no doubt in your mind?
There's a piece of this, I think, that's a mysterious part of our process as our life journey, our life process as human beings. I hate the word process, but our life decisions, I don't know. I mean, I will say there was one piece of it that made it much realer, which is that this is a little bit more the fairy dust. I guess a year after I learned the game or something, I'd have to look at the timeline, a year or two, a year maybe, not much more than that. And I was playing these home games, and then I also found like a pub league in New York City, right? And these pub leagues are gorgeous training grounds and they're national. And the presence of women in these games is proportionally very, very high, very high. And they're a great place to learn. It's all points. There's no money involved, and they're tournament style, et cetera. I was playing for points in a pub league and feeling like that was a very serious thing for me. Like I was dressing for my pub league games. This is when I was going to the World Series, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that period, through my writing life, I was also leading creative writing workshops through the New York Writers Coalition. And they called me one day and they said, you're going to train somebody next week, and they're going to come to your workshop and you're going to train them to be a facilitator, another leader. I go, great. The person who showed up was Matt Matros, who's, now he has 3 bracelets and, he's just a brilliant player. I had no idea who he was. And he didn't reveal his poker life to me at all. He came as a writer because he's also a novelist and a creative writer. So that day, the weirder part of that day, and I had never done a writing prompt involving poker or cards. That day, I brought a deck of cards to the workshop as a writing prompt, and Matt was in the room. It was all just strange. And then I still didn't know who he was. And then a week later, one of the writers said to me, oh, he was really a nice fellow. He's a poker player. I'm like, are you kidding me? I came home, I looked him up, I called him, and I wrote to him. I was like, why the hell didn't you tell me who you were? And then meeting Matt, and then I asked him if he would coach me. And I was, again, like playing in a pub league, basically, right? And meeting him, and Matt was like a writer with a bank account, right? So he modeled something very specific for me. And that was another inflection point that helped me just sort of really deepen my attachment to the game. And at that point, I realized, I said, that's when I really knew, like, this is it.
Yeah, this is it. And Matt is still your coach today, right? This is almost 10 years.
He's not, actually.
Oh, he's not. He was your first coach.
It was my first coach.
I know you work with Tommy.
He was my first coach. Ed Miller was my second coach. And I've worked with Tommy Angelo for the last 3 years. And Tommy is still my coach. So I've been very blessed to have 3 world-class coaches in a very, very short time.
Tommy's the man. I would just pay Tommy to hang out with him, just to.
Yeah.
That's kind of the trick of this podcast, right? Like, he comes and hangs out with me for free for a couple of hours, and I would have paid him. And don't tell him that, but like that's the trick of podcasting, right? Like, I would pay money to hang out with you, but you come on and you do it for free, and we both have fun, and so that's a win-win.
You had your last chat with him was gorgeous, by the way. I really, really enjoyed it. And yes, he is just a phenomenal person and a great coach.
That conversation went to some places that I did not expect it to go. I will tell you that. If you missed that conversation, highly suggest that if you're listening to this right now, go back and listen to Tommy Angelo round 2. I was going to say, I used to run a program called the Elite Program, and in it was a volume program. It's since canceled, but basically the purpose of it was professional poker players. It was mindset and volume. Like, we're going to find out what you're made of. You're going to push yourself. You're going to go to bed at night with the knowledge that you did as best that you could in this day as it related to your poker career. And they had multiple blocks that they were supposed to spend time on every day. Physical, mental, spiritual. The spiritual block is the one that I want to talk about, because what I believe is that our consciousness, our awareness, people call it a spirit, right? It's spirituality. It's the thing that makes us human. It's the thing that gives us personality and makes us who we are. The spiritual block was the one block of the day that my guys had the most problem with, which is funny because the description of the spiritual block is do something that resonates with your spirit. Do something that you enjoy doing, that makes you happy, gives you fulfillment, that gets you excited, right? Like, whatever it is, it could be riding your bike. It could be walking your dog. It could be whatever, just gets you going. And, when you say that, like, something happened and it was you loved poker and you knew it was going to be a thing, to me, that's just recognition that your spirit understood and knew that, like, this is a thing I love dearly and I'm going to hold on to it. And
recognizing that, just for the listener too, recognizing when your spirit wants to do something, when it gets fulfillment and joy out of an activity, being in touch with yourself and giving yourself permission to pursue that thing is so powerful in life. There's no reason to sit around and pursue things that don't make us feel that way. Whenever your spirit celebrates, pursue that, and only good things can happen, as far as I'm concerned.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that I've been thinking a lot about this actually in the last few days. Kind of who has financial privilege and class privilege in order to the notion of pursuing one's bliss or pursuing one's joy or finding joyousness in life. I've just been pondering it, and I think it is connected to especially having a poker life, and why I think it's harder for women to enter the game in terms of financial resources, et cetera. And those are complicated. That's a complicated analysis, but I love what you're saying.
Very
yeah,
complicated.
But I think I mean, I think it's part of the very, very basic core human condition in terms of how we find meaning in human life. I think human consciousness is a very, very tricky affair. I really do. And I think that I have a friend in Vegas who's in his 40s and, you know, trying to figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. And I can tell that he just wants to jump and kind of take some risk. And I said, listen, I've lived a really high variance life for 30 years and I've never regretted any of that. But I support how you're describing sort of orbiting closer to oneself and how one takes those chances. I think it's really almost temperament. You know, I'm sure we both know a lot of folks who can't take the leap, and that's not a judgment. It's simply people are wired to do that or not.
Yeah, we're wired. Most people are wired to stay in what they understand and what they know. And moving out of that is a very scary thing. You know, there's cognitive bias, the ambiguity effect that, like, if you don't know the result of what you're doing, you're less likely to do that thing. You're more likely to do the safe thing that you have experience in and that you've done over and over and over again. And yeah, human consciousness is just a crazy thing that, like, the only reason we know it's a thing is because we have it, right? Nice. Like that's the only reason we know that it exists is because we have it. But let's go back to your poker journey. So you find Matt, and then what happens? Because obviously you're living a successful life. You have a great career and you're in New York. Today you're in Vegas. And so there's a transition that happens at some point, right? Yeah. Over these next few years. So tell me about your immersion into poker. Well,
you know, Matt first trained me as a tournament player. And again, even though I'm very grateful for his commitment to me, because I said to him, listen, will you coach somebody at my level? Because like it was like 3 levels up just to get to absolute beginner in some sense. But he's grounded me in just a solid math foundation to the game, and just really was very patient. And I think I was a good student, and I think he could see that. So he was coaching me, and I was playing tournaments in the pub league and then in home games in New York. And then kind of by accident one night, I found there was like a low stakes cash tournament thing in a warehouse in Brooklyn. and then behind me was this cash game. I'm like, huh. So and then I sat down that night to play cash. I'm like, what's this kind of thing, right? And I won $100 or whatever it was at a 1-2 game. And that was it. Okay. That was like, then the cash world took over my brain in New York City. And for some reason, and honestly, Brad, I've checked in with myself a number of times about this. Like, I'm not sure what it was about the cash structure or why, I don't know. Just when I encountered the cash structure, I abandoned tournament play very, very quickly, and I've never looked back. I really have nothing. I have an immense admiration for great tournament players, and I think that part of the game has gotten even harder. But once I found cash, I loved the structure and I loved the immediacy. I love it, and I loved the dollar for dollar thing. So then that took me in a journey of like a more, and then shortly after, I guess maybe 6 months, I forget the timeline, but in the next year I met Ed Miller, and worked with him. I edited the course, which is his 9th book. And then we worked together for a year after that. And then I had a beautiful life in underground poker in New York City for several years. And that was like adventurous and magical and sometimes dangerous. And that was the next phase of my life. And so
tell me dangerous. You can't say dangerous and just leave it at that. Like what's a dangerous situation in these New York private games?
I would say, you had, I forget the name of your guest that you had on recently, who also was playing high stakes in New York City. I was playing low stakes in New York City, but, I was careful. I don't mean like life-threatening dangerous, but I've written about this, a lot. I've been blogging for, Red Chip Poker and for Poker News for many years, and have been working on a memoir about my poker life. But there's a kind of a little Raymond Chandler part of my brain that you knock on those doors, right? And you kind of don't know what you're going to expect. And it was a kind of, I took some chances there. I never put my life at risk, but, I went to a couple of edgy spots that, I was never in a raid, and raids didn't happen every day. But I played regularly in a spot that moved around a lot because they got raided a lot and they were sloppy in how they were running their game. And then I went to one spot that, was kind of the edgiest. I felt was the edgiest. Like, none of the folks running that game were smiling. I came in through a small vestibule off of Fifth Avenue. They had to absolutely make sure who I said I was, who, all that. I was allowed to go upstairs. There were often kind of black curtains you had to sort of pass through. And there may have been some other activity going on there, having nothing to do with poker. That
there may or may not have been.
As it got explained to me, and when people would, and I've done interviews, and then folks would write to me or call me if they were traveling to New York City, because I loved putting people in safe games. And then I became like the perfect, I looked for the value. I looked for the perfect rake. Like, I became this aggressive, let me just say, like, self-hating Jewish, like the perfect Jewish bargain finder, right? Like, that's what I did. And I found the safe games with the perfect rake, the excellent rakes and all that. And I played in some wild games with like, 10% max 40 kinds of rakes and like 5-5 straddle games and stuff like that. So those were a couple of edgy spots that had been raided. I was never in a raid, but and as it was explained to me that the authorities in New York City there was an operation in one of the boroughs that was massive, and it was stupid to have a massive operation. Any of the 24-hour operations with multiple tables and a lot of activity, like that is a lot of cash coming through. And that supposedly there was an undercover cop that was going to that game. That raid was headlines in New York City, and, felony charges and this and that and the other. The cops didn't, I remember Phil Locke some years ago was sort of amazed that the poker scene in New York had changed so much that all the underground games were listed on Meetup, and they still are. Like, if you go to Meetup right now, you'll see where they all are. I don't think that the authorities really give a damn about the 1 or 2 tables. It's the 24-hour joints with anywhere from 4 to 20 tables, with massive rakes and stuff like that.
That's a card room.
That's a card room. And it's also if there's an overlay of other activity that is, not in keeping with poker, not in keeping with lawful behavior, they're going to pay attention to that as well. I mean, but also, what underground poker in New York goes not just the 90s and the Mayfair and that gorgeous history there, and then the next period that your other guest had spoken about, and then me coming after that. But even like going back 30 or 40 or 50 years, there were social clubs, for example, all over the Lower East Side, where this was where I lived for 30 years, and it was a Spanish and Black and Jewish and Dominican, Puerto Rican neighborhood and ghetto, really, in the most beautiful sense of that word, a shtetl, to use the Jewish word. And there were social clubs that you went up a tiny little elevator and the door opened and there was poker games going on and judges there and cops there playing, right? So the social club culture that you don't have access to that information unless you know someone who's in their 60s in the Lower East Side, which I do, and they shared that narrative with me. And I'm sure that went on in a lot of cities. And that even precedes, and that was just a very hidden deep in the culture of the Lower East Side, and I'm sure other parts of New York as well.
And all around the country, most likely. Funny enough, the first home game that I ever played in, I found it after doing a Yahoo search. That was, it was listed online. That was like the first, probably 2004, 2005. The first home game I found was just like a random search. Home game in Chattanooga, and something popped up, and then all of a sudden I was automatically plugged into the Chattanooga home game scene. I've never been a part of a raid either. I got very lucky and narrowly avoided one time. And I guess all things are in perspective, right? I think the only time I've ever felt uncomfortable in a home game was they ran a game where there was like 10 tables, maybe 15. It was at a country club. It was basically a card room, really. And it was just wall to wall with cars. And the back of the parking lot had no lights. So like it was just completely dark. And at the end of the night, like I was always playing the highest stakes games that were running. And I'm a cash game player. Like I don't really care about the tournaments. You know, the tournaments drew a lot of people in, but like I would show up a few hours after the tournament started when the cash game started amping up, and then I would play all night. But so I would park like in the dark portion of the parking lot. It would be like pitch black dark. And I remember playing the big stakes games and like seeing the people look at me like as I'm cashing out and getting this money. And I'm like, holy shit. Like I'm not going to walk in that dark parking lot by myself. Like I would pay a dealer to like drive my car around and then be like super paranoid looking in my rearview mirror. It probably didn't help anything that like one of my good friends, we were eating in there one time and he just said, wow, this would be a great spot to rob. You just pull up with an unmarked van, you fire a shotgun shell into the ceiling and you probably get $100K. And I'm like, fuck, thank you for that imagery there. Now I'm even more terrified of something happening. But by and large, that was the only time that I ever felt really unsafe, I guess, in a home game where basically I was getting cashed out in front of everybody and people knew that I had a large amount of money on me. Right. And it was like 4 a.m. and yeah, like anything can happen, right?
Yeah. I totally hear you about that. And, I think, it's a thing, you know. I ran into a tournament player a couple months ago here, and he was telling me like once at the Rio during WSOP, you know, he felt like he was followed up in the elevator and he was being followed and he was about to be robbed and he hated the Rio for that. I go, why are you playing in the hotel? Yeah. It's like somebody just was like following a tournament player with a high profile tournament player. It's just like, the inverse for me of what you're describing in terms of that terror, what I came to love in my underground poker life, the simplest thing was that I had jackets and clothing that always had a lot of zippered pockets, which maybe a lot of poker cash players have that. But I remember one of the first times I came home in the summer and I was playing on Lexington in the late 30s, like around, that was where the location was. And I had a really great night and it was very new for me. And as a woman in the game, and you talk about just the attraction and the kind of being attracted to something. And this becomes sort of more psychological and spiritual, but there was something for me to get around financial success in a competitive context relative to my family history and a lot of other very complicated things there. But when I first started playing, and I actually talked to another female grinder recently and she said something similar, but if I won and I dragged pots, it still happens to me now occasionally. If you're looking at me, if you're really staring at my body, you're going to see like my back goes into like temporary spasm or my hand shake. So when I'm just pulling the money toward me, my hand would shake. So there was this kind of feeling of just amazingness of like, this is mine and I did this and I'm successful at this and I get to have this. And it was just kind of beautiful feeling. So I'd stuff my pockets. And one night in on early victory, I was walking down Park Avenue, and it was the New York summer. And I hate it. I don't ever want to go back to it now, but that oppressive, humid, like exhausting thing. But I was walking down Park, and I was like covered in money, my body. And, just felt it was like the most joyous feeling in the world and it was all kind of hidden. It was all just hidden, and nobody in 1,000 years would have thought, oh, there's that woman walking down Park with her pockets filled with money kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was the inverse of what you're saying about the terror.
Yeah. And that has happened to me many times where like I fly to Commerce, and when I played at Commerce, I wouldn't cash out like the pink chips. I would just take them home with me. And so like I would just fly, and I'm like, oh, like I've got, $75,000 in my backpack, like just on a flight, and like nobody knows. And it's just this hilarious thing where you're like, it's kind of a cool feeling where you're obviously kind of paranoid about your backpack at that point, but you're just kind of under the radar, and nobody really knows and nobody cares.
And I think it's completely unique. I mean, in what other profession are you except unless you're a drug dealer?
Drug dealer. That's the one. That was the immediate one.
There's only two professions where you're kind of running around with a lot of money, in your backpack or whatever. I mean, it's quite unique, actually.
I never thought about it, but you're right. Only somebody that is selling drugs or poker players or really have a ton of cash on them, or have the need to carry a ton of cash on them,
and are casual about it.
Yeah, just like whatever.
It's just a normal business. It's just a.
You missed this whole part of poker, but like coming up, it was like a bunch of sub 25-year-old people with immature brains, and just like you go out to eat and you pull out a roll of money. You just have like a bunch of hundreds in your pocket, and you're like, okay, like here you go, and everybody that you associate with who's in poker all has just like wads of cash, and they're on their person all the time. You don't even really think about it at some point.
Right. I have to say that's been part of the Vegas experience for me, because I grew up in Los Angeles, and I worked in the film business, and that's a company town. And for me, Vegas is a company town in terms of money, not just in terms of poker, but it's a company town, and the level of ambition here is unbelievable. Like it rivals New York or even surpasses it. But that has been part of my acculturation here. And just, I have a friend who's a brilliant, he has a great job in the poker ecosystem, but he also is a brilliant blackjack player. And, brilliant, not a card counter at all. He's just a natural in the game. And so the other night I ran into him at a casino, and he said, yeah, I don't know. I played for an hour or two, and then he like reaches into his pocket, and he goes, I don't know, I think I made like $14,000 or something. And he just like, no, I loved it. He just like looked at this. It would be like me saying to you, oh, look, I found this silver dollar on it. He's like, yeah, he's counting the chips in his hand. He's like, yeah, it's like 14,000. It was a pretty good. And he puts it back in his pocket. But I love that. Oh my God. It's just like, so I told Tommy the story, and he was like, yeah, it's Vegas. I mean, the whole money thing, you're just like, money.
I thought I was bawling at like 23 years old or 22 when the Razr just came out, like the Motorola Razr. It was like the phone of choice for all the cool kids. And like I went to a phone booth, and they ran my credit, and I had no credit because I'm a poker player. I've been playing poker for 4 years. Like they're like, I'm sorry, it's a $500 deposit, and that's what we need. And I was like, oh, and I just like hand them $500 bills, and they're like, nobody's ever paid the deposit before. I was like, oh, well, I get it back, right? Like I get credit. They're like, yeah, you get it credited eventually. I was like, okay, yeah, just give me the phone. I want the phone. But yeah, that's just kind of the poker lifestyle, how it was back then.
Yes, I don't. Yeah, I think what you're describing is kind of a little bit eternal. I have a feeling. I think you could find those moments now, especially.
Oh, yeah. For sure. There's kids that, they're walking around with God only knows how much money, and whenever something costs something, they're like, yeah, here you go. And you're like, holy shit, did you just did you just pay $1,000 for a meal? He's, yeah, whatever. Let's go. Let's move on with life. It's not even a big deal, right? I think that's the funny part is like these things happen and it's not even like a thing. It's just like a thing that happens and then you move on and don't even talk about it.
Right. Yeah. It's just it's a lifestyle question. Yeah.
For sure. Let's go back to your story. See, this is what I do. I take us off in these tangents and pull away.
No, not at all. No, not tangents. It's lovely what things you're saying.
So how the heck did you get to Vegas? Like from New York? Let's talk about that.
Okay. I just I don't want to forget to tell you about my high stakes thing. I'll tell you that in a minute. So I was playing in New York, obviously, and in some really beautiful environments. And Tommy said something very important to me. He said, "You're not in a professional environment underground." And
hold on a second, because you have a you're a high-powered professional, right? Is it necessary to be in a professional environment in poker for you?
Tommy knew that what happened was I was in New York and I knew that I couldn't, if I wanted to I started to fantasize about, I was thinking, I can spend 6 months in Vegas. I can, started to be this fantasy. And I started to say it out loud and he started to listen to me and he was coaching me. And he said, the notion of this is my opinion and everybody finds their path. But if one has professional aspiration in poker on the cash side, I mean, people don't move to Vegas, very successful tournament players, Matt, numbers among them, many others don't move here. I don't think that one can really evolve in a professional track outside of a casino city. And that's my opinion. And that's what I believe. And that's what I would tell anybody. And that's what I would tell women, especially because I have a couple of friends who play in New York who are absolutely brilliant players and they can't get out from under a terrible dynamic, which is rec players who are not studying the game and who are coming to a game after work and who maybe have money and maybe don't. And they're just calling stations. And then, he's tilting all the time and he's judging himself by that environment. And I said to him, you are so good and you need to get the fuck out of New York and get V to a casino city and have a real poker life. And that's an idea that Tommy introduced into my life, this notion of professional context. And I wish that I had known that earlier and I was exhausted and I was tired of the cold and I was coming to Vegas. I had come 3 or 4 times and I grew up in LA and I missed the desert and I missed the sun and I really kind of missed the West. And that also exploded in me, that feeling exploded in me. And then I took a trip to Vegas by myself without Tommy being here and without anybody being here for me to rely on. I came by myself and I looked for a place to live and I on the city and I was like, there's no there. There's no there in Vegas. There's no city here, right? I went from the densest city on earth to the not densest city on earth. And I was very nervous. Like there's everything. There's no there, here. There's no here. There's kind of not, except that what's here for me, like when I walk into a casino, every cell of my being vibrates.
Isn't it funny how that happens? Here's how I work as a human being. And I will say sometimes whenever I'm in a mood that I don't like playing live poker. I'll say like, I don't like playing live poker. I don't know. It's very slow. I prefer online. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like I convince myself of that. But when I go to a casino, something changes. Something lights up. And it feels like this is home for me. It feels like this is my place. Like, I think that whenever I enter a poker room, I'm the most comfortable out of all the places that I enter in my life. It's like this place is my comfort zone, and I just love it. Like, I really do. I get energy when I walk into a poker room because I'm like, I don't know if it's like these are my people or if it's like this is where I'm an expert and world class and this is how I apply my trade and like this is built for me to come play. but whatever it is, it always hits me very hard whenever I enter a casino, especially if I haven't been in one for a while, where like, yeah, I feel the cool air on my face. I smell the smells, and I'm like, yeah, this is my comfort zone. This is my place.
Right. That question of comfort, what you just said, I think is urgently important in our consciousness, in our life. And you're describing tribe at a very deep level. I think the tribe, walk in a poker room, it's your community. It's an environment that you completely understand, and you completely sort of just moving through the water. You're just completely yourself.
Yeah, that's a thing too that I've been reflecting on. Maybe I'm just getting older and reflecting on why things are the way that they are. Mm-hmm. But having these kind of conversations and these connections with like podcast guests, and they always leave me feeling energized and just full of life. And I'm like, I need to go run a marathon or something because I've got so much energy in me. I need to get it out. And lately I've been coming to the conclusion that it's because, you know, when I started in 2004, there wasn't really a tribe. Like, it was hard to find it was hard to find my people. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My people didn't really exist. And then I played online for many years after playing live. And what I'm realizing is, like, with building a community, having these interactions is like, you're my people, right, Sasha? Like, all of my guests, these are my people. Like, these are people who share my interests, share my passion, share my pursuit, are constructed like me. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I didn't have many people in my life that were like that. And so now connecting with people that I see myself in is just like, it's the coolest thing. It's hard to even put into words how awesome it feels.
Right. I mean, you're describing a sense of belonging.
Right.
Very, very eloquently. Yeah. And that's a powerful feeling too. I have a pretty, I've been shaped. I think I have a more relative to this notion of community and tribe and compassion and honoring, which is a funny word in some sense, but I think I have a more progressive attitude toward the game than many. I've been shaped by Brown's book, The Poker Face of Wall Street, and the Zen in the Art of Poker, Tommy, certainly by 1,000,000%, that I feel that sense of community in every game, and that doesn't erase aggression and wanting to win and needing to win and enacting strategies that allow me to be profitable. But I'm interested in not simply for myself, like walking into that room and taking that feeling and that sensation right into the dynamic of the game. So there are moments where there's an old Zen saying, like, broken people make bad enemies. There are moments where I haven't really destroyed someone, or there's times when I've been sitting next to kind of absolute beginners and I help them, right? I'm just interested in that, the connective tissue of what we're doing that doesn't stop for me, like walking in. I totally relate to what you're saying about walking into a poker room and feeling that energy. And I like to take that energy into the game. If I have occasionally fought with people in New York City, I occasionally lost my temper. Like, I hate when I do that, and I try never to do it, but I did once or twice or three times. And I always I couldn't stand the tension. I couldn't stand not being respectful to someone, even for 3 seconds. And I always apologize. And maybe that's a gender thing. But what you're saying, that I just think we're like one organism in a session. I want the respect for coming toward me, and I want to give other players that respect.
So when I was immature as 21, 22-year-old me, I have certainly acted, said, and done very regrettable things at the poker table. I've gone after people for no reason other than we're battling. And I think that, you know, you look back on this younger self that's quick to anger and quick to words and confrontation, and you're like, God, that fills me with so much shame looking back on it. Like, why am I going after this person that did literally nothing to me? Like, didn't, other than we're battling at the poker table, right? And I think that to me is, that causes me a lot of shame, like even 13, 14 years after the fact. And, you know, again, I guess there's a maturity factor in that when you were getting into poker, you were not even in the same solar system as me as it related to maturity, I'm sure, as a 55-year-old versus a 19-year-old. I don't know. I feel a lot of regret about getting angry, being annoying, coming after people that I wish I wouldn't have done. And for the listener, like, just don't do it. It's easy to do that. It's easy to get in a competitive environment, want to be an alpha, and just yell at people or whatever. Just battle people for no reason that haven't done anything to you, and learn from my lesson. And luckily nowadays, I can't remember the last time it's been at least 13 or 14 years since I've done that. But yeah, it was a part of the growth process that I don't love. But yeah, I think another part of it too is poker, at least for me, when I walk into like a bar, that's not my comfort zone. I don't know what to do in a bar. Like, I'm like, okay, people are like drinking and like there's strangers talking to each other, and I don't know, that's not really how I'm constructed. I just kind of sit somewhere by myself and like drink, right? Like it doesn't make sense to me. But poker, when I sit down at a table, it makes sense. I understand what's happening, and I sit down, I plug in, and like that's it. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is that like the poker table makes sense to me, and that's a really strong feeling when you sit down and you enter a place that just makes sense, and you're like, yeah, this is what I was made to do.
Yeah, I really relate to everything you're saying, and also what I think what you were describing in terms of acting out at any age, right? I mean, I've been really lucky as a woman in the game, playing a lot of live poker. There've been 2 or 3 incidents, and one time I cried, but for the most part, people were very respectful to me. But when you go off on something, I feel like you're really kind of just messing with your own mental game in that moment, like the Phil Ivey tradition of mum poker. And that's also as a woman, poker gave me permission to be silent. Women are socialized into a lot of nurturance and caretaking, and always just having to take care of men at every level. And so my experience allowed me to just reinvent myself in terms of gender at a really deep level. But what I was thinking as you were describing the act out, and I would say if somebody think it has a potential to just put you in just, I practice detachment and indifference when I play. So if one is yelling at someone or tapping the glass or battling like verbally or whatever, unless it's something really organic to how you play the game, I think it has a potential to take you completely off course in terms of your energy for that session.
Oh, for sure.
I'm at the opposite spectrum, because I caught up very quickly, even though I started late. And part of the reason I caught up fast is because I use other language besides mental game. I use a language of mindfulness training and awareness training and stuff like that, because I think I need broader ideas, because what I do in terms of my quote mental game is advanced for my years. And I feel like I caught up very quickly. So I practice detachment and indifference to every hand. And so I can't be, if I'm yelling at someone, I know you understand this, but it doesn't allow me to stay in kind of a more indifferent sort of space. Like, I take a break. Part of how I structure my game and I keep myself very grounded in my play is that I take a break every 90 minutes religiously, whether I'm winning or losing or whatever. I get up. I just get up. So I get up. And then even if the dealer is in the middle of a hand, I get up, and then my cards will be sitting there. And this is just a small example of detachment, but the players will be like, miss, you have a hand. I'm like, cool. I just walk away.
You're absolutely right. And I think that like taking a break every 90 minutes is a very intelligent thing to do. And just walking around the casino, get the blood flowing, standing up, stretching, all that stuff is very important when you're playing live poker. So speaking of the women in poker and all of that, and we said it's a very complicated issue. And, this happened just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I was looking at my podcast demographic and looking at like the splits between male and female and the age ranges. And I realized that like 22% of my audience from 18 to 22 years old are female. And then it goes down a little, and then it plummets. So from like 25 to 45, it's like 2 to 3%. And I was looking at it, and I called my wife in the room, because I was like, oh my God, I see something. I'm like, this is kids. Like this is like the child rearing years where females don't have a lot of time. They're raising children, and that's a lot of energy. And they don't have hobbies, right? And I think that is another barrier. That's like, there's just not enough time to pursue poker in earnest through those years if you have a family and if you have kids, because mother raising the kids and then going to play poker at the end of the day probably isn't a very socially, conditioned and socially acceptable endeavor.
Right. And I've written about this a lot and studied it, and I'm thrilled that Poker Power is now doing a survey and they're collecting all kinds of data for the present moment. I mean, I had guys who I played with in New York who had high-powered jobs, and they were doctors and lawyers and this and that and the other, and they had the luxury of coming to play poker for 4 or 5 hours at the end of their workday, because their wives were home taking care of the children.
Exactly.
So, yep. I mean, I think it's a question. I think there's several moving parts here, and to your point, in child rearing involving financial resources. It takes money to start a poker life. Mobility, obviously. Women have nightmarish stories about playing live. There's, at least several years ago when I did some of that research, there was a much higher ratio of women playing online because they felt safer. There's all that too. I think that consciousness is starting to shift. And then the question of how, women don't have culturally, like you guys, like in high school, like I know countless male poker players who like had that experience where they were playing poker in high school. They got together with their friends to drink beer and play cards. I've never once heard a woman say that. So culturally, that was also an acceptable thing.
It's a lot. It's a whole,
it's a whole matrix of things.
Yeah. And it's a complicated issue, and just the difference in life experience between male and female is so huge. Me telling you that I was terrified somebody's following me in the car. This is something that I'm just like gaining awareness of in present day. My wife was telling me that like she leaves her work with keys between her fingers because like if somebody comes up on her, she's ready to bop them in the face with car keys. And that's something I've never experienced as a male, ever. Like, if I didn't have a lot of money on me, I would never be cautious about somebody because why would they follow me, right? And what are they going to do? Why women are not in poker and the barriers to entry and all. It's a very complex issue where my life experience is not the same as a female, and they're just very, very different.
The barriers to entry question, I think, is also a fascinating one. And there are all these sociological kind of reasons and blah, 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 blah. And then there's also the question of, Vanessa had written some years ago a really beautiful piece. Like when she was coming up, she was a woman wanting to play on male sports teams when she was like grammar school or high school. And that was just like kind of who she was and how the resistance to her being that. But she was somebody that had the gift of aggression. And women are not socialized into competition and aggression in the same ways. And that is changing because you have female sports leagues and young girls playing sports and all this kind of stuff. But also it begs the question of how poker is marketed, how it's taught. I've been a consultant for poker brands for the last several years, and I've talked to at least one business owner of a training site, and they have some understanding that women have different learning processes and are kind of absorbing the game in different ways intellectually, but also the question of how poker is marketed. And most poker brands are not marketing to women. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg question. People say, well, women are the next big market, which is what, Poker Power is interested in kind of taking women from poker into a stronger corporate life, which is great. But if women are the next big market, but no one really sees that, to kind of put more women into the funnel. But poker brands are not marketing to women at all. They're very masculine in their color schemes. They're very masculine in their language. There's not, Poker Power purposely did something kind of very feminine in terms of their logo and their color schemes. So there's a whole marketing question of how poker brands speak to women. I mean, if you listen, 99% of people, I'm guilty of it too. Poker hands are described. Villains are always the masculine pronoun. Even folks that I'm aware of who are very conscious people and who say that they have an awareness of this and they want to make their content inviting to women are never using a feminine pronoun. And these are small things. But when a woman looks at a typical poker site, what are they seeing? They're seeing what language of crushing and destroying and prevailing and killing, and it's a very masculine lexicon, right?
Yeah.
It is. So, and again, in terms of somebody, I have the same goals, right? Your money should be in my pocket, but I'm never going to use the lexicon of crushing and destroying and owning you. I'm not interested in the lexicon. And I think I can get to that same point through my behaviors and through my consciousness and all those things we've talked about. And I can get to the same point, but it begs, again, how do women find the game? And I think Poker Power is great in doing what they're doing as one, and other women advocacy groups who are like fanning out across the nation, helping women feel like, no, this isn't just a cigar smoking back room of a saloon, which is how I always think of poker. I don't mind being in a community of men, even young men. I love the saloon possibilities. That's me. But how do other women feel comfortable in and feel? I've had young women say to me, oh, I don't really get it, or I don't feel like I'd be good at it, or whatever. I don't know. I haven't met that many men that ever say that, actually.
And I think it takes people like Vanessa, and it takes the type of personality like Anna Marquez, who was on the show a few weeks back, where when Anna found out about poker, I asked her point blank, like, did you ever have any thought that like you were not going to be successful on this path? And she's like, no, right? Like, and that's how I felt. And I think that like for the women in poker that succeed at a high level and have lots of success, they need to have whatever the bug that had me was. It's not a recreational stumbling into poker like a lot of, the corporate world, businessmen, those type of people. Like you said, everything's branded, marketed towards them, and they just kind of fall into poker. But, for females specifically, it's like they need to love it. It needs to resonate with them in a big way where they're going to pursue it. And they're the ones who take the action to put themselves in there. Whereas everybody else, the male side of the equation, they just kind of stumble into poker and they just play, and it's like a thing that, okay, yeah, let's just play. It might be fun.
A rite of passage in some sense, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking that there's all kinds of cultures that have lots of women in them. My mother played a game called Pan, P-A-N, which is very big in Jewish communities around the country. And she and my dad played Pan for 40 years, and she played Pan in Los Angeles casinos. And then there's bridge, and there's other competitive card playing cultures that attract women, except poker doesn't.
So, John, you've used neutralized flop leads in the past 24 hours, correct?
Yeah, so I got basically the slide with all the info on it on Friday evening, and yesterday I played a session of 1KNL on Ignition and played one particular pot that I remember where a fish just donked flop, turn, river into me, and I ended up winning with a hand that I would have folded before looking at the slide, but I ended up winning like a $400 pot instead, and the course is $99, so definitely paid for itself very, very quickly. And I think that'll be the case for even people that aren't playing as big as 5-10 no limit. Like, I think this is a course that will very, very quickly pay for itself given how much more donking there is at lower stakes. And I think one of the most common questions I see asked in the Greatness Village Slack group is, what do donks mean? How do I deal with donk bets? I think that's got to be like in the top 3 most frequently asked questions.
You ought to feel very excited when somebody donks into you because some good things are about to happen.
You said like you probably don't need anyone to teach the course, or like you can just look at the slide and learn all the info yourself. I feel like you, Brad, will have to be there because I'm almost sure that anybody who looks at the slide won't believe it looking at what they're supposed to do, and we'll have to confirm with you that like you didn't make a massive typo somewhere and that this is actually what they're supposed to do, because it's pretty shocking the optimal way to deal with fish donking into you on the flop is.
If you'd like to check out neutralize flop leads so that you're never again confused when a fish leads into you in a single raise pot, head to chasingpokergreatness.com/nuffle. That's chasingpokergreatness.com/NUFFLE. And now, back to the show.
I'll say something that may be controversial. I don't know, whatever. I'm going to say it. As an industry, poker does not have its shit together. And this is very obvious to me as a content creator, as somebody in the space, as a poker player. I realized that this industry, it doesn't have its act together. It's behind. There's no innovation in poker. I'm guessing that things kind of fell apart after Black Friday. As the money stopped flowing in, things kind of were dialed way back. But like now, if you have a customer service issue in an unregulated place on any poker site, you're not going to get it answered. They're not going to get back to you. They don't care. And that's just what I find from this industry. It's like they just don't care. It's like, yeah, we're going to do things our way, and we're going to have horrible customer service. We're not going to innovate. We're not going to spread new games. We're not going to go after botters. We're not going to spend a lot of money on security and deal with it because you've got no other option. And that to me is, failing to market brand towards females specifically is it's just one of the things that this industry gets very wrong. And I hope over time that we can do a better job of, serving people. But yeah, it's just, that's the reality, I think, of the present day poker landscape. And until things turn around, get regulated, there's more competition, I don't think it's going to change, unfortunately.
I totally agree with you. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because people will post things, on Twitter or whatever, how they've been screwed over by this or that platform or things, and people are not servicing them. And I do think that the poker industry is, to your point, it's way behind, years behind the rest of the world in terms of business practices. I think it's changing slowly. And I think a couple of brands that I've had, contact with that have excellent, outstanding customer service. And I shout them out because they do.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We should focus on the positive. Like when good things happen, we should celebrate those as well on Twitter. Like we should go to Joey Ingram talking about a good thing so that he retweets it. So instead of just all the negative stuff, but with that said, I'm going to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just interested to see, like, I've checked in with myself, like again, I get a lot of respect at the table, but if I have a difficult moment in playing live here in Vegas, I've checked myself about how to handle it. And I have a number of scenarios, and, I've just thought about it. And I think it's casinos, from what I've read, and I get the sense that,
what do you mean by a difficult moment?
Like, say somebody just goes off on me, or somebody insults me, or somebody just goes off on me.
Yeah.
Men don't like to lose money to women in general.
They don't like losing money. They really don't like losing money to men either. I think
but generally, if somebody
amplified.
Loses, and but I've checked in with myself, and I think casinos are starting to be more sensitive to how women are treated in the card rooms, and we'll see, and hopefully I won't have to test the theory.
It's good. I mean, I'm glad that they're gaining an awareness finally. It's not like it took a rocket scientist to figure this out, like, as it relates to casinos. Like, I mean, again, another thing that gives me a lot of shame as it relates to my live poker career are the times that I didn't say something to people when they're being totally inappropriate and just jackasses. And I think I could have stood up and said something many, many times, and the times that I don't, it's another thing that gives me, I feel a lot of regret and shame over. But yeah, I think, I don't even know what I'm talking about now. I lost my lost my tangent, my train of thought. Where am I? What am I doing right now?
Yeah, I've intervened once or twice when things got weird for other people, and I just become a total Jewish mother in those moments. But I want the table to feel, just to have a serenity as much as possible. So if I can help, I try.
Yeah. The situations I'm describing, there is no serenity possible.
No, I know.
There was no serenity possible. It's stand up, do what's right, and even if it hurts you, even if it's uncomfortable, just fucking do the right thing. And I think that, like, if people in poker did the right thing more often than not, like, that would, again, we're a self-policing industry, right? This is how funny our industry is. Like, when a cheating scandal goes down, the poker players are the ones who discover it, not even the platforms. How do you feel about going to a little bit of a lightning round before we wrap up here, Sasha?
Sure.
Where did we stop in your poker journey? You made it to Vegas. You were immersed
Vegas.
in the culture.
And then COVID,
what happened?
And then COVID
what happened
came.
after that?
No,
okay.
I moved to Vegas and 3 weeks. I just also want to say parenthetically, Brad, that just in terms of training and catching up and whatever, like I did the math recently, and for some reason, when I was still in my poker fetus period, I started watching high stakes poker. I started streaming it. And I did the math, and I think I've streamed close to 10,000 hours of high stakes poker over the last decade. And that's something that just kept calling to me. And
What do you mean by streamed high stakes poker?
I would just go online and stream content that had already been
you would watch it.
I'd watch it.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. You consume it.
I've consumed somewhere around 10,000 hours of high stakes poker, like 1,000 hours a year. And I kind of went with that too. That attraction to when you were talking earlier about sort of the intense moneyness of a poker and a gaming life. And in the old days, there was like all those big wads of cash on the table. But I always just responded to that, the game at that level. And I've just gone with it. And I continue almost every day of my life. I stream high stakes poker. But that I watched, even though I wasn't playing online, and I've absorbed and watched the best players in the world and studied and thought about those hands as if I were in that game. And that was one method for me of just learning and studying and absorbing the culture of the game, which I think is how you get good at something. That helped me, I think, catch up a little bit, even because I started so late and I just made that commitment.
Yeah, again, it goes to show like this is your passion. This is what you love. This is what you're immersing yourself in. And I miss the days of all the cash. Those were fun days where somebody just had
the bricks,
$30,000 and hundreds. There's a guy. His name's Shane, and in Vegas he would just play with cash. Like he would have like 4 chips in front of him and like $30,000 in cash. So like every raise is like he's just throwing hundreds everywhere. Good times. Good times when you could do some things that maybe are frowned upon in the world. Basically, if you're going to cash out back in those days, you're like, oh, you want my seat? Here's $10,000 in chips. You want to hand me the cash? And okay, we got a transaction, and then you leave. You basically avoid the cashier.
That still happens. I mean, maybe not with like bricks of like cash, or maybe it does in high stakes rooms. I don't know yet. I hope to find out.
Okay, so lightning round. Lightning round.
Okay.
If you could wave a magic wand, change one thing about poker, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. Some of what you were talking about, just how the game is, how inviting or not inviting the game is for women.
Absolutely. And something just kind of came to my mind. I don't even know if it's going to make sense, but I'm going to say it anyway. There was this, I believe his name is Zimbardo, who ran the Stanford prison experiment. And he has a thing that he calls deviant for a day. And basically what he challenges people to do is basically get a marker, something you can wash off, and just put a rectangle on your forehead for the day. Don't tell people why you're doing it. You're not doing it for any reason. You're just doing it, right? And basically his point was that that's a low stake thing to deal with, right? And that's a low stake thing that you can go out in the world and experiment, and you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. You're going to feel a little bit weird. But the point is that you're feeling uncomfortable and you're feeling weird with a small thing. Because when something happens and it's a big thing, when you need to stand up and do the right thing, if you're used to feeling uncomfortable by doing these low stake type things, you're more likely to act when it's necessary to act. And that's just something that kind of stuck with me for a while now, of like, okay, like let's do some weird things. Let's lay down in the middle of a Starbucks and for 15 seconds, not tell anybody what you're doing and just do it, right? Something that is just off the wall, wacky, weird, makes you feel uncomfortable, but has low stakes. And if you do those things regularly, like you said, when the situation arises where somebody's uncomfortable at the poker table, you're much more likely to speak up in that moment than you would be because, you're used to feeling uncomfortable.
That's interesting. Yes, I agree.
if you could gift all poker players 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 books to read, what would they be and why?
As I mentioned before, The Poker Face of Wall Street by Aaron Brown, which is just absolutely brilliant and talks, just breaks down, delves into the culture of the game in such a unique way, and just has modes of analysis about the game that I've never seen anyplace else. He wrote it at least 10 years ago. The other book I adore, let me get the exact right title here, which was written about 100 years ago, called Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. And it's a seminal text in trading. It's seminal and it's famous. And, I feel like you can read 5 trading books and know everything you need to know. That's a book that I've gone through, marked up almost every page, and then I circle back and I write out where the trading and poker overlap happen, and then I write out what I've learned from his trading experience, etc. And the other one is Zen and the Art of Poker, which I think is a masterpiece. So.
Why? Why is Zen and the Art of Poker?
I think that for me, the real power of poker has nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with being and awareness and mindset and mental game, and a kind of how you enter the organism of a session. I think that's more of, I think you can learn strategy and then you can learn math and you can learn odds and you can learn all that. But if you can't sort of be not only completely self-aware, but aware of people around you and feel like be one spoke on that wheel of many spokes in that game, take in the data, take in the information, honor the people you're playing with. I think if you bringing your consciousness to that high of a level when you play, I think is a very powerful place from which to play.
Absolutely. 1,000%. And poker's an emotional game, and poker's a pressure-filled game. And I have seen many, many people who think about poker in a high theoretical way. When they sit down at a poker table, it all falls apart, and they don't even know how to cap their cards anymore. So execution is way different than theory, and ultimately, if you can't execute, the theory doesn't matter. So really prioritizing the execution, being in the flow, being present, acknowledging your emotions, acknowledging how the pressure's impacting you. I think all of just gaining an awareness of all these things are, just something that you have to navigate in your poker journey, because that's life, and we're human beings, and human beings really aren't built to be poker players professionally. So
wow, that's a big sentence. That's a gigantic sentence. I love that sentence. And I do want to just shout out to Jason Su, who's one of the newer writers that I just love his book. And I know you're connected to Jason, et cetera.
I hate the book. We don't talk about it.
I know. But I think it's important for players, when players hear words like flow and, whatever. I don't think it has to get goofy. I think that you practice things, you practice being in your body when you're playing. I think you practice, Jason's getting at some of this, Tommy gets at a lot of it, and Tommy was writing about it, 15, 20 years ago. And I think you inhabit yourself in a particular way. And that is practicing. It's a set of muscles, mentally, physically. I think poker is immersive, and people say, oh, just don't tilt. Tilt for me is a body-wide immersive experience. And I think you have to start there in terms of getting out from under it.
It's in the same way people say, oh, don't tilt. Yeah, it's like saying one of your loved ones passes away and you go to the funeral home and you're like, yeah, don't feel sad. Don't feel sad about, like, you feel your emotions. They're your emotions, right? Like, you can't just flip a switch and not feel them. It's not that simple. Right. And yeah, like, the way that I think about it, and maybe this helps the listener too, is like, if you're watching a football game, right, and the quarterback takes a snap, rolls out to the right, throws a dart 40 yards downfield, hits a guy in a 2-foot window, like, is this person like actively thinking I'm going to take 6 steps to the right. Now I need to do this mathematical equation so that I can get this ball directly here. No, the dude reacts. He does the things that he trains to do in the moment. There's no thinking. There's no like, I need to do X, Y, or Z. I need to throw this 40 yards at this angle to get the ball specifically right here. You're executing on your training. And that's what poker should be. And that's what I think like being in the flow as it relates to playing poker means. It's taking your training, executing it, and just being in the present moment and trusting yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I get excited and I just start talking and I end up a place that I don't know where I came from or where we ended. If you could erect a billboard, every poker player's got to drive past on the way to the casino.
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
What's it say?
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ? Is that your final answer?
I would say this is not original to me. I would say we're all poker schmucks. That is the most grounding thing that anyone has ever said to me. And I refer to it constantly because when I get nervous or I get intimidated or I feel like someone has this much more knowledge than me, someone I really trust said to me, we are all poker schmucks, that we're just sitting down and playing and, grinding it out. And, that's what I love, the idea.
That's a greatness bomb and something I think about. And I'm now 17 years into my career as a poker player. And I don't even know if I've been having the thought lately that I don't know that I can quantify myself as a professional poker player because I haven't been playing poker professionally for like the last 6 months or so. But the more I research, the more I learn, the more data I look at, the more I think about strategies, the more I'm convinced that we all are awful at this game. And there's so much more to discover and learn and uncover. And yeah, I think just we are all poker schmucks.
Hold on, I want to clarify this because it's an important word for me. And schmuck in Yiddish means a lot of different things. But
sure.
For me, it's not. I don't agree with you that we're all bad at this game.
You don't agree with that?
I do not. I mean, when I say we're all poker schmucks, meaning that we are all just, we sit down and play poker like, it doesn't have to be glorified. It doesn't have to be anything. Mm-hmm. And I like the idea that, not that for me, I mean, I don't want to take your language away. No. Not that we all suck at the game, but that if we stay curious about the game forever, I think it's also part of our success formula. And we stay humble. Like I say, when we're all poker schmucks, meaning it allows me not to give somebody power or not to feel like somebody is smarter than me or any of that. It helps me to honor my own intellectual process and just to stay with myself. Yeah. That's what I mean. And that to stay curious and to stay humble. The humility factor for me is gigantic. And I think the people like Seidel, Phil Galfond, countless others who've been interviewed and folks say to them, what's your magic formula? I mean, Seidel is so beautiful. He's like, I kind of, I adjust and I adjust, and Phil Galfond had some beautiful quote years ago that was like, whatever, I don't know, I have no idea. And then recently Tom Dwan was in a hand on one of Poker Go shows and he shoved over somebody's raise and then they folded to his shove and he went, God, I didn't know what to do. Like, this is Tom, right? He was like, I don't know, I didn't know what to do there. Right. And I love that. Like, we know nothing kind of mostly every minute. We know nothing.
That's what I said.
No,
that's what I mean. We all suck.
No, I don't think we suck. I just think there's so many moments where we just don't always know the exact right next step to take. And it's the fundamental reason why the game is so challenging. And I think the fundamental reason why the game is so invigorating.
Yeah, for sure. That's what makes it so appealing is that it's this thing it's unconquerable. Because there's always so much more to learn and there's always so much more room to grow. And like I tell people all the time, like watch Phil Galfond playing against Bill Perkins on Twitch and talking about his thought process. Like record how many times he says, I don't know. It's hundreds and hundreds of times. Like, I think I should do this. I don't really know. I think I'm going to do that. Like, this is the mind of one of the greatest to ever play poker, not knowing what to do very, very often. And that's just the reality of this game is like, you don't know what to do very, very often. And you just have to trust yourself to do the best that you can in the moment and then come back to it when you're done playing. But you have to accept there's no cut and dry, hard answers as it relates to the game of poker.
Which I actually have to say that I think it's a weakness in the way content is delivered to the universe today, because we are so now programmed to feel like there should be some one right answer. And I think that I only improve in game flow. I only improve when I put into tough spots over and over and over and over and over again. And I don't think that's said enough. And I'm guilty of going to Tommy or saying like, well, what about this or what about that? Or here's this hand or whatever. And it is such an organic process. And I think that people are not trained enough to really trust their own process in terms of how they're getting better. And I think it's a problem, right? Because there's so much content directing people away from their own intuition.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, there's a thing that triggers me, and I didn't realize that it triggered me until very recently, but it's the word why. When it's a thing that is like easily Googleable. Is that a word? Googleable? Mm-hmm. Like you can look this up, right? Like why do we do? I'm like, dude, put it in Google. Don't ask me. Like, I'm a human being. Why are you taking my energy to answer this question that you could just answer on your own? That drives me up the wall, where it's like, have some autonomy, have some like go-gettedness, figure this shit out on your own. Don't try to make me hand you every single piece of the puzzle. Anyway, that's just another tangent that I just decided to go down.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is both the golden age of content and kind of a weird age of content, I would say.
It's hard too.
It's
like
both.
I make stuff for poker coaching, and like, they'll be like, put out an easy webinar, like three tips, yada, 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 with some like keywords. And like, man, when I think about 3 tips, like my mind explodes. Like, it's like, I don't know what because it's really hard to just say something that is just so cut and dry in the world of poker that applies across the board to every situation that like, I don't know how to like simplifying things. Honestly, when I can simplify something and explain it to people quickly, like that's actually a very, very powerful thing that I've invested hundreds of hours into thinking about, to be able to transfer something simple to somebody else, because in poker, it's very rare that one cut and dry thing applies across the board. And yeah, it's just hard. Like I said, I don't know if everybody struggles with that as a content creator and as a teacher and course creator and a coach, but like, I really struggle in saying easy things to do that will make your game better, because it's hard for me.
I understand. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying about simplifying. I just, in terms of coaching, I want to make sure I say this because it's very important to me.
Yeah.
In terms of books that I read and coaches and all of those and content that I absorb, and I absorbed a lot like all of us, I think it's important to find environments, intellectual environments through content, through your coaching, where you are relating to the operating system of the coach. Every coach has a different operating system. There's not infinite numbers, but there's many. And when there are certain books I open and read and I feel relaxed and joyous, and other books I open and read and I feel tense and I want to cry. So it's very important as we learn to find the stream of ideas, and there's several competing streams now out there that suit you.
Which is a good thing, right? It's good that there's several competing.
It's a very good thing. It just, it's like, I think I happen to, the universe put 3 coaches in my life that were completely in like they were perfect for me in terms of their operating systems and how they taught the game. I was very lucky in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know where I would be if I hadn't found them, or they hadn't found me.
And I would say 100% like that. That's another greatness bomb. And if anybody out there tries one of my courses or private coaching with me, and like, I don't resonate with you, find a new coach. If you have a coach that doesn't resonate with you, that doesn't make sense, that isn't a facilitator to you getting to where you need to be, then find a new coach, because, it's very important that you find something that resonates with you specifically.
Yeah.
And you are very lucky finding Tommy. If there's a human being that Tommy can't resonate with, like, I don't know any human being that Tommy just can't impact. He's such a freaking amazing human.
Yeah, he's ridiculous. On the amazing scale, he's ridiculous. So, yeah, he definitely is. And I feel very, very fortunate. And,
All right. What's your current big goal as it relates to poker? We're a few questions away.
I've been thinking about your excellent title of your company, of your brand, Chasing Poker Greatness. And I checked in with myself on that. And I was like, what does greatness mean for me? So in terms of my goal, I think I define greatness as feeling like in every session, I have a set of intellectual muscles where I'm making excellent decisions 90% of the time. And wherever that takes me in terms of my poker trajectory and however high stakes I end up playing, which I have some serious ambition in those stakes.
What stakes? What's your ambition? Let's put it out there.
I can't.
Why not? You can't put it out there?
Just because I don't know how I'm going to get it fucking bankroll.
Hey, if you can't put it out, how are you going to make it if you can't put it out there?
No, it's like, no, because I mean, it was very sweet. Somebody recently on one of the older streams, like a stream from 10 years ago, a really famous player, they said like they like went to like a 100, 200 or 200, 400 game with like $8,000 or something. And that's like all they had, or they had to borrow. Anyway, men go towards something with only like 20% of credential, and women have to make sure they have 110% of the credential, right? So a man has happened to like borrow half of a bankroll for a $100,000 buy-in without any shame about it. They're like, oh yeah, I only had 50,000, so I borrowed or like got staked for the other 50,000. Like women would be like, oh my God, there's no way. Like I have to have like $500,000 in the bank. That's the big gender split right there. So,
I would say there's a lot of males that don't feel comfortable asking for $100K too. I think so.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I'm just like,
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You got to be over, like you have to feel way overqualified.
Yeah, but yeah, the greatness for me is really whatever stakes I end up playing. I just want to feel
not going to get it out of you, huh?
I feel like I want to feel great to myself, and that seems sort of goofy, but I know you understand how that feels, where you're like, yes, like I crushed that one decision, and then you just want to go tell somebody like how amazing you are because you got the decision right, or you feel like you did. We're all sick. We're just sick.
Well, we like playing poker, and making good decisions is what makes a good poker player. So you ought to be excited when you make great decisions.
That's true.
What's a project you're working on that's near and dear to your heart?
I recently finished a first novel. I have a life as a fiction writer in addition to my poker life and my corporate life. I've been a little busy in my middle age. I recently finished it. It took me years, and trying to bring that into the world. And writing a novel is like life changing. It's like having 3 babies. So I'm fingers crossed on just making all that realer. So
cool. Congratulations on wrapping it up, and best of luck. I'm sure that through your career you've probably made a fair number of contacts, and hopefully, I'll be happy. Does it have a title? What's it about? Like, is it related to poker or just a separate thing?
It's not related to poker at all. It's not historical fiction, but it spans about 75 years on the Lower East Side and starts in 1910. So it's very much a story of survival and regular people and poverty and community and orphans and a lot of things that have happened in New York. I lived in the Lower East Side for 30 years, and this book just literally kind of emerged out of me when I was in graduate school, and then it took me years to realize it was a very ambitious first novel. So I'm proud of it, and I don't think any book like it exists about that neighborhood. So we'll say fingers crossed.
Congratulations! That's a great thing to wrap up. And final question: where can the Chasing Poker Greatness audience find you on the World Wide Web?
Well, thanks. First of all, I want to say that I've recently changed my name. So my legal name is now Sasha. My pen name up to this point was Eileen Sutton. So my poker book, which is called The Total Poker Manual, which is an absolutely gorgeous text visually. There's nothing like it in poker literature visually. it's a great book for beginners and holds beginners' hands. So my blog and article work through Red Chip and through Poker News is in my pen name, my old pen name, which is Eileen Sutton. I am on Twitter at Poker for Girls, and it's going to be a little confusing, I guess, for some folks for a little bit of time. They're going to see both of my names there as Sasha Eileen Sutton, and my website is Sutton Stories, SUTTONSTORIES.com, and I am extremely responsive, and folks can write to me through the site, and folks can certainly reach me anytime through Twitter, and I have a very active Twitter life, poker life, and writing life there.
Awesome. Sasha, thank you very much for your time and your energy. It's been an absolute pleasure. Would love to have you back again sometime in the near future.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. If you have yet to subscribe to the show, please take a second to do so on Apple Podcasts or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts may be. For more content from me, Coach Brad, please visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/enhanceyouredge, and I'll see you next time.